2020 was an amazing year for video games. I played some of my new all-time favorites this year. I think this is the first year that I played almost nothing but games that I enjoyed, with only a few outliers of bad games, and because of that, I look back on this year's games very fondly. The reason why it's my top 9 and not 10 is because I didn't play a 10th game that came out this year that I felt was a cut above the rest like everything else on this list, that it deserved a spot. Everything on this list is a must play in my opinion. I wanted this video to be more in-depth than a simple top 10 list like I did for the best and most disappointing games of the decade, which I uploaded in January of 2020. Some of these games I've already made videos on, so I will end up repeating a lot of points from those videos, along with not covering them nearly as much as some of the higher things on the list which I haven't talked about on the channel yet. The original reviews for these games will be linked in the description below if you want to watch them. Of course, like every year, my backlog got more and more out of control. With so many things releasing, I simply can't play them all if I want to remain somewhat productive like I am now. So instead of delaying the video and by proxy the rest of the stuff I plan to do this year by taking a few weeks to play some other games I wanted to consider for this list, here is everything that I wanted to check out but missed. I'm going to put a warning here that every review is going to be full of spoilers for the entirety of each respective game. I recommend playing all of these games before this video for the best possible experience of enjoying them, though it's not actually required. Timestamps will be in the description below so you can jump around and avoid spoilers using the YouTube chapter feature if you want to go into these games blind. To start this list off, number 9 is awarded to Crash 4, It's About Time. I feel bad putting it this low on the list because Crash 4 was a game that successfully gave me the warm and fuzzy feeling of playing a new mascot platformer that isn't filled with shit that makes me want to die. I don't even have that much nostalgia for Crash compared to things like Ratchet & Clank, so I felt like it never really factored into my enjoyment of the game. Just playing it for a few minutes, you can really feel the infectious energy the game has, between its great soundtrack, the vibrant colors and art direction, and extremely expressive characters and their animations. The dialogue was never incredibly grating to the point that I wanted to play the game muted like some other games did. I just love when Cortex is on screen in this game. He always has this shit-eating grin and is by far the most expressive character with his facial animations. The movement of this game has the perfect amount of weight behind it, so it always feels very responsive and not very floaty, which I think is a must-have if your game is all about precision platforming. Like I mentioned in my impressions video on the game, Crash 4 has a robust amount of options that I really appreciate. Multiple fonts, font sizes, semi-transparent backgrounds for subtitles, multiple colorblind filters with a 0 to 10 intensity slider. In an ideal world, this would be an industry standard. Some of the games on this list I would have really loved are the increased font sizes and these subtitle backgrounds, so the text wouldn't end up blending in with the actual game due to the font being white on white environments, having the tiniest of strokes around the letters. I wish I had more to say about the game, but with only doing a video on it less than a month ago, and the fact that it's rather simple, there isn't much more to say about it. And when I say simple, I mean that it had a very specific set of goals that it wanted and needed to be. A fun and original new entry to the series that isn't a remake of the old games, or a reimagining taking the series in a new direction that no one asked for. And it passed that task with flying colors. The biggest issue with this game outside of its load times, which become a non-issue if it ever comes to PC or next-gen consoles, is that going for the completionist route of this game is a massive chore and isn't worth it. While playing, I suspected that might end up being the case, as they kept introducing new collectibles and trials pretty far into the game. I had decided at that point that A, I didn't have the time to go for 106%, as I have a lot of ambitious projects coming up that I want to make and a bunch of new games that I want to play. And B, even if I had the time, it doesn't really seem that worth. And then after putting out the video, a bunch of people in the comments were telling me how they enjoyed playing the game regularly, but going for the completion version sucked all of the fun out of the game for them. Then a bunch of videos started showing up in my recommendations about how collecting everything was a nightmare, like the video Cat Icarus made on the game. My advice is, while there is a lot of content in the game, focus on the stuff that actually interests you and don't bother going for 106%. Even with that blemish on the game, game, Toys for Bob managed to capture the magic of Crash and released an excellent platformer, and I'm excited to see whatever they come up with next. Definitely don't miss out on this game if you're a fan of mascot platformers or Crash Bandicoot. Number 8 is another game that I have already made a review on a few months ago, and that is the Destroy All Humans remake. Similar to Crash 4, the Destroy All Humans remake managed to capture the magic of the PS2 sandbox murder sim while updating and improving some features for the modern day. I do have a lot of nostalgia for the original 2 games, and this remake successfully made me feel like I was back in 2005 in my basement playing the original. Like any good remake should, the improvements to the game's core loop exist to further enhance the fun factor without losing the original identity of the source material. Weapons have some really nice quality of life changes, like the ion detonator now having a range indicator, or the disintegration ray now allowing you to kill people without vaporizing them, so their bodies will be left on the ground and you could harvest their brains. Movement is far more fluid now, allowing you to run loops around humans as you destroy the towns you're invading. The original game wasn't much of a challenge, but with the new additions like Skate, there is very little in the way that can stop you. Sadly, due to how psychic powers were reworked in the remake, the G-Men have lost their uniqueness and now blend in with the crowd as a semi-generic enemy, along with the brain harvest mechanic having zero restraint due to the lack of running off of a resource, so you can just run around tapping the X or square button and just kill everybody. While some redesigns take some getting used to, there was a lot of effort and care put into translating the original designs to the remake's new art direction, like being able to see the concept art for everything, which includes pictures of what they were originally based on. Every game should honestly have these DVD special features to watch once you beat the game. I'm glad that they included their own, but it is a shame that the original behind the scenes stuff for the 2005 title isn't in this game. It would have been a neat side-by-side to see their approaches when making the original to the remake. I feel bad not covering this game more in this video, but I basically said everything I wanted to about it 3 months ago in its original review. Like Crash 4, it's very simple in its goals of what it needed to be. A faithful remake to what I consider a 6th gen classic and revitalized the series, which has since been dormant for 12 years after missing the mark with 2 duds in 2008. In my opinion, the remake passed this trial with flying colors. It's a great remake, and the modernized gameplay is fun on its own that I eagerly await to see if Black Forest Games will attempt a new original sequel to the series, and hopefully it will be on par with Destroy All Humans 2, which is where I think the series peaked, though I don't think that Path of the Furon was nearly as bad as the reviews it got. I would like to cover Big Willie and Path of the Furon sometime later this year. Originally they were supposed to be videos following up the review for the first game and remake, but I kinda got burnt out, so those got put on the back burner. The craftsmanship put into Hades is insane. I could instantly feel this game's quality just in my first mini-boss fight as the music began to swell. So I don't particularly like the roguelike genre, it just doesn't mesh well with how I like to play games. I often really enjoy the combat for these games, like with Dead Cells for example, and this game, but if I could just have all the aspects I like about these games in a linear 2D, or in this case an isometric action game, I would rather have that. It really just comes down to the fact that I always find a combination of items / upgrades that I really like, and even after experimenting with other combinations and even finding things I like, I always find myself wishing I could go back and just play that like a build in an RPG. The starting from square one and gaining new abilities is the key factor that makes me get bored with these types of games. It's why I like things like Bloody Palace and the Cyber Grind, and why I don't particularly love this or the classic mode of the Super Gore Nest Master level in Doom Eternal. If each time I wanted to play the Bloody Palace and I had to start back from a fresh save amount of moves, and I had to regain them as I went up the tower and get some new random moves along the way every once in a while, I would play about 10 hours hours and go, yeah, that was fun, and have my fill of the game. That's basically what happened with Dead Cells. I think the game's fantastic, but I don't see myself getting the true ending by beating the game on 5 BC. In 2020, I realized that I much prefer games when they just give me all the tools and tell me what needs to be done, and the barrier is execution. My hot take for an eventual DMC6 is I wouldn't give a single shit if they got rid of progression and just gave you all the moves at the start. They definitely won't do that, but I've been unlocking Stinger for like a decade now. If it just came unlocked from the start, you wouldn't hear a complaint out of me. I know I haven't really talked much about the game, but that is where the hard part of writing this section lies. What else can I say beyond the art is really pretty, the story is interesting, and the voice acting is good. I like Nyx the most. She reminds me of Lulu from Final Fantasy X. The combat has good feedback and there's a lot of varied weapons. The only real complaint I have with the game is that I actively dislike at least half of the boons in the game. So much of it is just incremental meaningless stuff that doesn't give the gameplay a modified feel compared to the others. Like, I never want to see Dionysus, Aphrodite, Artemis, or Poseidon's boons. Maybe there is some cool shit that they give and I just haven't seen it yet, but in my experience, they just give slight debuffs, damage over time stuff, or small stat boosts. Poseidon does have the knockback modifier, but I don't like it, and even Ares, who has the blade rifts that I like, does have the debuff crap. I never felt a reason to go for those boons when I could just get Zeus, Hermes, or Athena's, which modify the gameplay in a way that makes it feel really fun and unique. I don't doubt that these boons that I complained about are actually good with some sort of combination that melts the enemies with all of the damage over time stuff, but it's just not fun to me. I wish all of the boons and upgrades were on the level of Daedalus's hammer. I love when you get the hammer and it does stuff like making your fist special now long range, or a kick for example. I want more of that and less damage over time for 3 seconds that does 4 damage a tick. Then when you get a palm, it increases the damage by sub 15% or just by a flat 1 point. I fear I'm coming off really negative about the game, but I seriously like it. I think the fact that I like it so much despite the fact that the genre isn't something for me is a testament to its quality. I originally felt a desire to write something more in depth about the game, but then I just sat here stuck with nothing to write, and I realized there's nothing really I have unique to say about the game, and there's no point in trying to reinvent the wheel when everybody else is already talking about it. This game is honestly a very impressive feat. If you like roguelikes or Supergiant's other games, definitely check this one out. 2020 was an amazing year for first-person shooters. Coming in at number 6 on my list is Doom Eternal. As of right now, I think this is probably the best first-person shooter campaign. I know they are kinda hard to compare since the others I consider top tier would be Modern Warfare 2's and Titanfall 2's. From start to finish, Doom Eternal was a load of fun and feels like the forerunner for a new direction for first-person shooters. It isn't exactly what most would come to expect from a boomer shooter, but it isn't exactly a Twitch shooter either, or whatever modern FPSs are denoted as now. It really is its own beast, an FPS character action game, and I hope this spawns more things like it. Doom Eternal has some of the best sound design I've ever heard. This is a game I wish I had one of those fancy theater surround sound systems so I could hear every little nuance of the mix. Similar to the King Kong movie game that I covered this year, Doom Eternal is filled with tons of sounds that I could hear in my head without even playing the game. The sound design also further elevates the amazing arsenal of weapons this game has, each weapon coming with 2 abilities that you could swap and upgrade between. I find almost all of them enjoyable to use, with a few exceptions with things like the microwave beam, which I find rather boring. Weaving it into combos to stun enemies is cute, but that's about it, and I don't really like it outside of that. I really appreciate that this game pushes you to experiment with weapon combos and doesn't just devolve into using the super shotgun until the end of time, which even then that approach isn't bad or even unfun, but there is something about the core loop of Eternal with running around swapping between your weapons that is so addicting. My biggest complaint about the weapons is how there isn't a unique key for the BFG in Unmaker like in Doom 2016. This resulted in me accidentally using it in frantic situations while I was cycling through my weapons while using the mouse scroll wheel. I wish they'd just add a setting to the game that would allow me to just have it only be bound to a key and I could not scroll to it with my scroll wheel, similarly to the setting already in the game which allows you to scroll over weapons that you don't have any ammo for. I'm not sure what other people think about it, but I was really surprised how much fun the platforming was in this game. Like everything else, it has this really nice crunchy feel to it that makes it so satisfying to do. It's a real shame that the level editor from Doom 2016 isn't in this game, because people probably could have made some really fun and creative platforming challenge maps. The best thing to happen to the level design of this game is how much verticality there is. Whoever thought to add these monkey bars to swing off of and launch you into the air deserves the biggest raise Bethesda can afford. I love when the levels are open and vertical jungle gyms to run around. It's unfortunate when the terrain actually bugs out though, which brings all the momentum of gameplay to a complete halt. It doesn't happen often, but there are a number of times where I was snagged on something in the environment or glitched into the walls or ground. This issue is 10 times more prevalent in the DLC compared to the main campaign. From my experience, it was so bad to the point that enemies were getting caught on things. There are only 2 features that I wish were in this game that aren't. I wish there was more momentum-based movement. Using the meat hook to fly around the screen and do all sorts of crazy shit and possibly sequence break is really fun, but it's all just tied to the meat hook. And even then, there are invisible walls to stop you, like trying to get the 1-up on the pillar in the Super Gore Nest. There is the ballista, which its kickback from firing I guess you could consider as momentum-based movement, but I never found an encounter where it was actually useful to shoot myself backwards. The other feature I wish was in the game is the ability to dash through enemies. Besides getting caught on the terrain, on higher difficulties and in the DLC where there are huge hordes, I found myself getting caught in mosh pits and ended up being trapped. Sometimes I could brute force my way out, and other times this would result in a death, and that's really annoying. Especially in the DLC, where a lot of the areas are far more claustrophobic. This is the most infuriating way to die in my opinion. It also causes me horrible motion sickness. I talked about it a little bit in my original review back in May, but there are a few things that cause me horrible migraines when playing this game. The first is the feedback when getting hit by enemies. Motion sickness is a complex issue that isn't a one-size-fit-all type problem, as the game does have accessibility options to turn off things like weapon bobbing and environmental screen shaking, but neither of these things tackle the actual issue I have. What causes the motion sickness for me is the simulated movement of whiplash when you're getting hit by attacks. As you can see in this clip, I have both of the settings enabled, and the screen still shakes when getting hit by these zombies. This shaking is infinitely worse when caught in the groups of enemies that I mentioned a minute ago. The other issue is the amount of flashing lights and vignettes on your screen when your health is low or hit by certain projectiles like the Cyber Mancubus's AoE blast. For some godforsaken reason, 2 of the 3 new enemies in the DLC also put obnoxious bullshit on your screen when hit by their attacks. I played through the entire base game and the DLC on Ultraviolent, and in the last few areas like Final Sin or all 3 of the DLC locations, your health can drop to critically low on a dime, so all of these flashing lights would give me serious migraines. I don't even have epilepsy, so I can't imagine how unplayable this game must be for someone with this condition. The big issue is that these vignettes are so intense and take up so much of your screen that even if it doesn't cause you pain in my case, it still obscures your vision, which I find really stupid. I think the best solution for this would be to add a 0 to 10 intensity slider, so you would allow players to adjust it to something they find more comfortable. That way people who like it the way it is now don't have to have the feature taken away from them. And then for people like me, the game no longer makes them sick. I would personally scale it so it would only take up about this much of my screen, because I find the fact that about 45% towards the center of the screen is taken up by a vignette is a bit excessive. Both of the issues I just listed make it so I could only play the game in short bursts. But while we're here on the complaint train, the bosses in this game suck. I really worry what the hell they plan to do with the evil Doomslayer in the Ancient Gods Part 2. I hope they just make it a mirror match and it's functionally like fighting a Marauder with your entire arsenal, but even more mobile. The only boss fights I enjoyed in this game, and even then you could debate that these aren't boss fights, are the Doom Hunters and the Marauder fights. The Icon of Sin, Conmaker, Samur, and the Gladiator all are incredibly unengaging and simple. I've held this opinion for many years now that if your boss fight has minions in it, 90% of the time it's because your boss by themselves is not interesting enough to warrant a fight, and that's the case for all of these. Let's focus on Icon of Sin for a second. I replayed these fights to get footage the other day since I deleted my original playthrough footage back in May, and the Icon of Sin had a tendency to just bug out and fist slam one part of the arena that I wasn't even near over and over again, or would just stand there doing nothing as I unloaded my minigun into it for its shitty armor to fall off. I really dislike these giant enemy in front of a ledge type boss fights. They are all more or less the same fight every time. You dodge their big fist slam and then pepper them with bullets until you hurt a weak point and they stagger so you could hurt them even more. And occasionally they will have a massive AoE attack or shoot projectiles at you. And depending on the game, they'll have you fight basic enemies along with it. These bosses often have way too much health, and because you get distracted by fighting basic enemies, it drags the boss fight out even more, when they honestly don't justify the length. Now let's look at Conmaker. She suffers from a lot of the same issues as the Icon of Sin. She is so unengaging that I sat on this one platform for most of the fight, shimmying left and right, dodging her projectiles, and blasting her with my minigun and rocket launcher till I had to go up and punch her. Occasionally I would jump down to get ammo and health from the other angels that I was just ignoring who were shooting at me the entire time. The same shit can be said about Samur, except for the arena you fight him in is obnoxiously small and all of the enemies put bullshit on my screen, and you have phases where you don't even fight him and instead have to fight the possessed ghost enemies, which are the only enemy in the entire game that I dislike. I loved the DLC's approach to remixing the Marauder fights, having you fight two at once, and then fighting a totem buffed one. I honestly really like the Marauder as an enemy, even if I initially found him kind of underwhelming after hearing so much hype about how bullshit of an enemy he was, while I was busy working on other videos and couldn't play the game, only to find out that it honestly wasn't that big of a deal. I don't want to end the Doom section off on a negative note because this game is still fucking amazing even with these issues. So let's end it off with talking about the visuals and music. The art direction for this game is amazing. I know it's kind of a meme to just say, it looks like a metal album cover, but I don't know how else to describe shit like this. I really appreciate that Eternal has a lot of varied locations. That's one of Doom 2016's issues, because it kind of all blends together in my mind when I think back to it, but that also might be because it's been about 4 years. I really hope for the Ancient Gods Part 2 they do some crazy shit visually, because outside of this one scene right here, I found it kind of underwhelming from a visual standpoint. It wasn't bad, but for something called Ancient Gods Part 1, I was hoping for more shit like this. I love all the little detail put into the gun textures, those little bits of wear and tear to show that these have been in combat. And of course, this soundtrack. Mick Gordon and Andrew Hulshult hit a grand slam with the soundtrack for the base game and the DLC respectively. This is my favorite soundtrack to come out this year, and easily one of my favorite game OSTs, right up there with Nier. I am nervous but overall optimistic about the second DLC, but even if I end up disliking it for whatever reason, the base game from top to bottom is an excellently executed first-person shooter single-player campaign. Definitely don't skip out on the master levels or Slayer gates, they're the highlight of the game in my opinion. And if you love FPSs, then you definitely don't want to miss out on one of the best ever made. Number 5 on this list can only be described as something wonderful. Without a doubt in my mind, this is Platinum's best. I've never played such a unique action game that kept me thoroughly entertained from start to finish. This game is Kamiya Unchained. Your ass is going to be playing through 5 Space Harrier sections and you're gonna like it. I've never seen a game homage so many different genres and things, and it all click into place seamlessly. This game has notoriously sold like shit, so hopefully with this section of the video I will sell some people on why this is pure platinum. So I guess I should first explain the combat of this game. It's, well, there really isn't anything like it. So the easiest way is to go, it's blank combined with blank and blank. You know how in Muso games you're one dude versus a million dudes? Well, in Wonderful 101, it's the inverse of that. This time you're the million dudes in a Pikmin-styled perspective with Okami drawing mechanics with a Super Sentai Saturday morning cartoon coat of paint. Essentially, this is all the stupid bullshit that I love rolled into one game. This is the biggest learning curve I have ever felt, and because of this, I think it probably turned off and turned away a lot of potential players, with how the game just throws you right into the thick of things at the start. It's very much trial by fire. It's manageable, mind you, but I got a few tips and pointers from my friends before I started playing it, which definitely enhanced my experience. After the prologue, you absolutely need to buy the Unite Guts and Unite Spring abilities from the store before starting Mission 1. These are your dodge and parry moves, and are vital to the flow of combat. The remaster made them basically free, unlike the Wii U version, which had them priced similar to other abilities. Thank God that they did this, because these two abilities are relevant right away. Now, the parry can't stop everything, but the logic I was told to use when trying to figure out if you can or can't was, well, you're transforming into pudding, so can they cut through it? If they could, then dodge instead. The strength of your parry is also determined based on how many active wonderful ones you have in your group. Members can be knocked out, which you can then wake them up by running over them or waiting a few seconds until they return back to normal. So this means there will be situations where you're not in the parry threshold for an attack from a larger enemy or one of the bosses. That doesn't mean it's not possible to parry it at all, but it just means you need to have more active party members. You can recruit civilians temporarily for the mission you are currently playing, along with finding permanent wonderful members hidden throughout levels, so I advise you to do some exploring. But some will be locked behind having abilities to get to them, like a Metroidvania. For example, this burning building I'm pretty sure you can only get to if you have the Unite Rocket move. Since this is a Platinum game, of course combat encounters have a time rating to factor in, but if you don't have an objective in the bottom right of your screen, then I believe you aren't in one of the sections that is being timed, so feel free to explore every inch of the area you're in. The ability I recommend purchasing first is the Speedliner. Since this isn't on the Wii U anymore, you can only draw your formations with the right analog stick. Speedliner, like the name implies, allows you to draw formations faster, which is paramount once you start getting other members in new forms. The detection for what you're trying to draw when getting some of the later game formations is kind of finicky, so the Speedliner will cover for the fact that you might have errors over and over again back to back when trying to get a formation you really need. You will also find these space peppers, eggplants, and carrots throughout the world, either laying around or you'll pick them up from drops from destroying things. In the menu, you can mix them together to craft items. You want to keep an eye on the amount you have, since you can mix the max amount of each together to make a wonderful credit card, which will allow you to unlock any ability for free, which I didn't end up realizing until after I completed my first playthrough. So who knows how long I was sitting on the 99 limit for all 3 items. It only takes 30 of each to make a credit card, and a few of the end/post-game abilities are very expensive, so I recommend saving them until then. Or, you could use them on something you really want, but don't want to wait for it, so it's honestly up to you. The cast is charming, but your mileage may vary depending on your tolerance for Saturday morning cartoon writing, which repeats the same few jokes over and over again. The only one that really got on my nerves by the end was Wonder Green, because all he does is cry for his mom. One aspect I absolutely adore about Wonderful 101 is how it consistently keeps itself tonally. Yes, it is very silly at times with slapstick humor, especially with the visual gags on screen while characters are narrating, but when shit is serious, it stays serious. It doesn't undercut itself with dumb music cues, like some other games that I've talked about recently. Like when you complete a mission, you'll normally have the commander go, "Good job, team," if you get one of the higher medal trophies, or will go, "Could have been better," if you do shit. But when the situation is dire, there is no announcer, it just keeps the foreboding music, and I really appreciate the game's restraint in order to sell this. It's a Platinum game, so you know that the story is absolutely the hypest shit put to video games. This is the greatest Gurren Lagann game we'll ever get. You know how I said this game has the biggest learning curve I've ever felt? Well, because of that, it has the most satisfying progression I've ever felt as well. Here is me at the start of the game struggling to fight this boss, and then here is me now slashing through them like basic enemies while fighting on a galactic scale. I look back at my footage at the start of the game and I just think, man, I'm fucking terrible at this game. And then watching me play the end sections, while I still suck comparatively, the combat has clicked in my head and I am just multi-uniting over and over again to do some of the most satisfying combos ever. Like Gurren Lagann, it has the same sense of scale and escalation of its enemies. At the start of Wonderful 101, you're just fighting little robots on a school bus and in a schoolyard. And then by the end of the game, you've seamlessly scaled up to fighting planet-sized enemies for the fate of the Earth in the most satisfying QTE ever put to video games. After beating the game, the only thing I felt was missing was a Bloody Palace type mode. There isn't really anything to do but replay through the story mode after you complete it, which is a shame because you most likely will not have all of the abilities unlocked, and stuff like Bloody Palace is always a good way to get points while not feeling like grinding. But the events of the story outside of a few places where the remaster has to awkwardly try to make up for the lack of a Wii U gamepad is still really fun to play through, even if you're just skipping the cutscenes. This will probably be the best Super Sentai game we will ever get, and it leaves me incredibly excited for the conclusion of the Kamiya superhero trilogy with Project GG. Maybe one day I'll do a retrospective on the entire trilogy, but in the meantime, everyone who's a fan of tokusatsu of any kind, action games, and platinum absolutely need to check out The Wonderful 101 Remastered. Now, some may say that it's cheating to put an early access game on a Game of the Year list, but Ultrakill is one of the best games I've ever played, and it's not even done yet. The design and thought put into this game could only be described as genius. This is my favorite FPS currently, and I consider is probably the best FPS I've ever played. It's everything I've ever wanted from one, executed so perfectly that it has made it hard for me to jump back to other FPS games without me going, man, I wish this controlled like Ultrakill. Hell, even when I was playing Ghost Runner a few months ago, I kept finding myself saying that I wish the parkour and wall bouncing physics felt like Ultrakill's. The game has some of the most fluid and satisfying movement I've ever played, allowing you to fly through levels like this. Ultrakill does one of my favorite things a game can do, and that is giving you an upgrade that I never knew I wanted, but now can't live without. The game has some of the most unique weapon abilities I've ever seen. They are so cool that they've made other games' alt-fires feel tame by comparison. At the time of making this video, there are 4 weapons in the game, 3 of which have 2 alt-fires and 1 that has 3. If the menus are anything to go by the time there's a full release, each weapon will have 4, and I wait very excitedly to see what else they plan to do with them. The pistol has my all-time favorite alt-fire currently. You flick a coin, and you shoot it, and your bullets ricochet off it to hit enemies' weak points. You can also use other weapons like the rail cannon to bounce off the coin. It is indescribable how satisfying it feels to flick a coin and then hit a weak point on the flamethrower enemies to cause them to explode. The perfect level of feedback that keeps the gameplay loop highly addictive. Then there's the magnet for the nail gun, which at first honestly didn't seem that impressive, as you shoot these spikes into enemies and the bullets will fly to them. But then you realize you could shoot 2 spikes on opposite ends of hallways and it basically becomes a tripwire laser of nail spinning into a tornado. You could also shoot the spikes to make them explode, and then you realize you could set up the tripwire and either let them explode on their own or shoot them yourself with another gun, and then shoot another magnet into a new enemy, and now you've created a bee swarm of death with nails. I really dig the aesthetics this game is going for. The blood effects really remind me of the blood explosions from No More Heroes. Earlier, I was listing my gripes with Doom Eternal. The thing that really pushes this game over with my love for it and why I have it at number 4 is that all of those issues are non-existent in this game. Ultrakill circumvents the ping-ponging issue with enemies by allowing you to phase through them while dashing. It doesn't give me motion sickness when taking damage because it isn't simulating a whiplash from a car accident and instead leaves the gun stationary. It doesn't have super obnoxious vignettes that flash on my screen when my health is low or I'm hit with certain projectiles. Ultrakill actually has a giant enemy in front of a ledge boss fight, and it's good, and it's all because of one small difference from all the others. The fact that you can actually interact with the boss beyond just dodging its fist slams is what makes this boss actually enjoyable, along with the fact that you aren't getting distracted by annoying basic enemies, which drags out the boss fight, and it doesn't have a stupid amount of health for how basic the fight is, so it doesn't overstay its welcome while being not mechanically as complex as the other boss fight in the game, Gabriel, which is also fucking amazing. The biggest quote-unquote issue with this game is that it has so much amazing tech to it and it doesn't teach you it at all. At this point, they've really leaned in on the fact that you could punch your own shotgun bullets and make them go faster and explode, which is fucking awesome, but originally I had to be told about that from a friend, or how you could reflect the malicious face's beam attack with a coin, which I only found out you could even do from a GIF on the Steam community tab that showed up when I went to launch the game in my Steam library, which other people won't even see now because there's been so many posts on it that it's no longer at the top. I think it would be really cool if there was a tech compendium or something that would teach you some of the really cool shit in this game if you collected the blue orbs scattered throughout the levels. There is so much crazy shit to this game that it is a shame that some of it may go without even being discovered for some players. If you love action games and fast-paced FPSs, then this is the game for you. At times it honestly feels like, you know, what if DMC was a first-person shooter? Which is pretty obvious that they were going for that, with their website being Devil May Quake and there being a lot of Devil May Cry references in the game. Like, I'm 90% sure the sound that the sword machine makes when he throws his sword is supposed to be a reference to the sound that DMC1 makes when you pick up an item or change your weapon in the menu. Ultrakill should absolutely not be slept on, and I wait extremely excited for the next update whenever that comes later this year. Once this game is completed, and if it keeps this level of quality, it will go down as one of the most innovative, creative, and best FPSs ever made. Yakuza 7 is the first mainline entry to shake up the formula and fully embrace its JRPG roots that have been there from the start. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little worried leading up to the release, but I can happily say that Yakuza 7, or Yakuza Like a Dragon as it's officially called, has made an excellent transition from action game to turn-based JRPG. It keeps all the hallmarks that I love from the series while breathing some new life into the franchise.
Heroes, it's Kira, the Kira, catch a nobody but yourselves, nothing less to do. No more heroes, no time to stand still if you're gonna be number one.
Travis, it's kill or be killed.
So leading up to the game, I had a few key worries about its gameplay now that it's switched to being a turn-based RPG. Menuing, since JRPGs are almost always very menu heavy. Are they going to be well designed visually and not take forever to go through anytime you need to get something? Combat speed. Would battles feel really slow and unsatisfying? Encounter rates, especially in the endgame. It has been an issue since the very first Yakuza game that unless you have the item to turn off combat, once you're near the end of the game, combat encounters become super tedious as they just get in your way of making progress. They take just long enough to feel like an annoyance in your way, but they aren't rewarding enough to not feel like a waste of time. And finally, grinding. Would the game just have an annoying amount of grinding to make progress feel non-existent? No complaints when it comes to menuing. It's fast, snappy, and there are a bunch of shortcuts for things like spells. I never felt exhausted because I had to spend 5 minutes in a menu changing everyone's gear because there are things like apply best items and auto-equip weapons once you buy new stuff at stores. Combat speed is fine. It's not too slow, but I don't think I would complain if it was like 10 to 20% faster. Encounter rates can still be annoying once you reach endgame. It does bother me that their only solution is still just to get the charm that makes you not have combat encounters, but I honestly don't know where and when I got the item. I just eventually realized I had it. We are 16 games in at this point, counting spin-offs and remakes. You'd think they'd come up with a better solution, but oh well. Grinding was surprisingly a non-issue for 90% of the game. While some of the damage scaling is kind of wonky, where enemies that are only a level or 2 below you basically deal 1 damage and enemies that are near 3 to 5 levels above you are one-shotting you, I felt like I was properly leveled until the Majima boss fight at the end of the game, which became a gigantic stone wall for you to go grind in the arena the game introduced right before this fight. Enemies in this area were even the same level as me, being around level 35, but then Majima is level 50 and tells you to fuck off and go to grind. With the change in gameplay came a change to the world structure. In all of the previous games, the whole town would be open for you to explore either right away or shortly after story progression. Like for example, you could explore the city in Yakuza 1 after chapter 4, which is only about 2 to 3 hours into the game. In 7, the city is actually piecemealed to you as areas are gated off by high-leveled enemies, which will push your shit in if you try to step into their territory. I have no complaint about this change outside of some of the sub-stories having to be put on hold since the shop I need to buy an item from was on the other side of town and I would die if I tried to go get it. It's a neat little mix-up to the formula and makes the city feel more foreign since it's both new to Ichiban and the player, as we've been spending the entire series in pretty much Kamurocho and Sotenbori exclusively. This also further drives home the themes of Yakuza 6 of times are changing, we can't just have our old adventures like we used to anymore. This game feels like we are now living in that fully changed time, with Ichiban literally having no home to return to and no place where he belongs in Kamurocho. Ijincho still has a very lived-in feeling that the Yakuza games strike with their locales. Like for example, you could talk to this kid in front of the job center and he says how his mom made him go, and then you go to the other side of town and find a lady waiting at a bus stop on her way to work, and she's worried about her son getting his own job. I do want to mention that my playstyle for these games feels somewhat unconducive with the change in structure and gameplay. Normally how I play these games for the first time is that I play through the main story almost entirely uninterrupted, doing very few sub-stories if any at all. Then once I unlock Premium Adventure, I will go back and do them all. While not doing these didn't make me feel underleveled, I did feel like I was missing out on some of the gameplay stuff since a bunch of the very useful summons are sub-story related. The only thing I really disliked in the game was the business minigame. Now I've never really been a fan of these type of minigames. If Mad Dog and Dragon's Dance were unlocked behind the cabaret and real estate minigames in Zero, I'd have zero desire to ever touch them. I don't think I would really dislike it as much as I do if I could just skip the stupid open for business bar filling crap, which just feels like a waste of time. I don't mind the actual management even if it's slightly on the boring side, but holy fuck, who finds this shit fun? We're already over a page into this section of the video and I haven't even talked about the combat yet. It's surprisingly pretty standard for a class-based JRPG. Of course, it has the iconic Yakuza silliness with jobs like the chef where you're throwing pizza pans at people like Destructo discs. I do like the jobs that were in the game, but I do wish there were more, and the fact that 2 are locked behind DLC is whack as fuck, even if it's only $5. I also wish there were more interesting classes for the females since they don't have any of the male classes. Like I just wanted to make Sayako a bulldozing wrecking ball, but I ended up just making her an idol so she could heal the team. Heat moves have been reworked into team attacks and special moves that play a cutscene every time, and you could really tell that the studio was having a blast when making these. And thankfully they allow you to skip the cutscenes because while they're fun and all, Essence of Mayhem does run pretty long and I'm tired of looking at it after the 40th hour. The game keeps the combat engaging by having QTEs for certain moves which powers them up, along with a parry which decreases incoming damage. It's not like Yik where it drags out the gameplay to do basic shit, so it's good in my book. The glaring issue with the new class-based system is how you actually change your classes. Since this is grounded in real life and based around Ichiban's Chunin delusions, you get your jobs from the job center, and it's the only place and way in the entire game to my knowledge where you can change your class. I see this as being hyper restrictive and ends up requiring you to do a lot of out-of-the-way trips to change a job. You don't know what you're going to be fighting in a dungeon, and if you go in and end up having a party member focused around an element that all the enemies are resist to, then you're just stuck with them for the entire dungeon. So you better hope this doesn't happen to one of your main damage dealers, or you're better off reloading a save before you entered. Then there's the issue when you want to grind in the arena that unlocks in chapter 12. This isn't so tenburi, so if you want to leave the arena once you reach a checkpoint and go change a class to level it up, then you need to go through a load screen to get back from the underground to the main streets of Sotenbori. Then you need to get a taxi all the way back to Ijincho and hope you don't get into a battle along the way, sit through another load screen, then get out of the taxi and either walk all the way to Hello Work or take another taxi to one nearby, which is another load screen. Hope you don't get into another battle on your way there again, change your job, then go to a store to get weapons for said class, hope you don't get into a battle on the way there where you're stuck with shit gear, then get a taxi back to Sotenbori, sit through another load screen, then walk back to the battle arena and hope you don't get into another fucking fight. Or you could take a taxi because you always come in on the opposite side of town from the arena, which then makes you sit through another load screen again, then sit through another load screen entering the arena, and only then can you finally get back to grinding. I played the game on the PS4 since I enjoy owning these games physically, and Screenwave Media was cool enough to hook me up with a code after my limited collector's edition from Pix and Love was delayed and trapped in the mail until January 14th. I probably just would have bought another copy as I'm most likely going to be playing this on PC for the retrospective when I eventually get to it, but I had already spent $100 importing the special edition from France. So this meant that the PS4 load times were really long, and this entire bullshit I just rattled off takes about 5 minutes each time, and that is beyond fucking annoying. As for the story, it's easily one of the best in the entire series, with its heartfelt narrative, lovable cast, and excellent passing of the torch. かかってこい I really don't think there's ever been a truly bad story in any of these games. There have been a ton of dumb plot points, contrivances, or conveniences, and that's even the case in this game at times, but as a whole package, they are always really enjoyable. The story is really well paced, especially in the early hours of this game, which is even the thing that people commonly complain about with JRPGs, where the first 6+ hours are tutorials. That's certainly the case for this game, because you don't even get to change classes until chapter 5, but because the story is still moving forward and you're still getting new party members and new plot points are being introduced, it never feels slow and dull. Now, while the social commentary isn't exactly new, as things like Japan's homelessness issue and how society treats and views the homeless can be traced back all the way to the first game back in 2005, but it is extremely well written in this game, humanizing the issues and life struggles that have brought people to this point in their lives and why it isn't easy as just getting a job to turn their life around. The biggest strength that the writing has is the camaraderie between what society looks down on as undesirables. Everyone has each other's back and works together in a heartwarming way. With Ichiban growing up in a soapland, he is the perfect vehicle to explore and explain these ideals to the other characters. Anytime he tells the bleached Japan guys to fuck off is an absolute treat. The Yakuza series has always had slam dunks when it comes to new protagonists like Akiyama, for example, but they really hit it out of the park with Ichi, taking a lot of ideas and setups from Kiryu but inversing them. further exemplified by their color palettes. Kiryu has a gray jacket with red highlights, accentuating Kiryu's stoic exterior but wild dragon interior, while Ichiban has a red jacket and gray highlights. He's a hothead, but when it comes down to it, his street smarts and upbringing allow him to come out on top. Foxcade pointed out on Twitter that Ichiban feels like Josuke to Kiryu's Jotaro, and that's honestly really apt. Then there's the rest of the main party, and I love all of them. They're all my favorite little gremlin has-beens. It's great. You'll get to see how their characters unfold in the main story, but also in drink links. These are basically your S-Link hangouts from Persona, or other support conversations like from Fire Emblem. But there are a few things that I think drink links do better than S-Links that I would love to see copied for an eventual Persona 6. So the way you raise your bond with party members is fighting in combat with them, or eating with them, and so on. This makes ranking up their bonds feel really natural and not get in the way. But the part that I really like is the fact that unlike Persona, where there is only one answer that gives you the most points towards your next rank, so there is always a quote-unquote right answer to give, all three in Yakuza 7 rank up a different social stat. Oh, and you can also see the level progression for your social stats. Drink links also do S-Link styled stories in half the time. Yeah, there's only 5 drink links for characters, and they always manage to be really gripping and satisfying. Adachi's and Sayako's are my personal favorites. If anything, they left me wanting more, but not in an, oh, this really didn't go anywhere kind of way. It was more in a, wow, I love these characters so much I just want to hang out with them more, which is great for the fact that these are the series' main characters now. The voice acting for this game is so fucking good. Kazuhiro Nakaya gave an award-winning performance as Ichi, especially with his final speech at the end of the game. The English dub is also really good, but I played the game in Japanese since that's what I've been doing since Yakuza 2. So hearing characters that up until this point have only been in Japanese and is what they sound like in my head, it's really weird, and there's a disconnect when I see and hear English come out of their mouths. Like, no amount of time is going to get me used to Daigo or Watase's English voice. I feel like it would be really dismissive of me to not mention the lengths they went in this localization, resyncing the mouth movements for English so they aren't dubbing over the Japanese mouth movements like they were in Yakuza 1, along with the game featuring both subtitles and dub titles, meaning that they have subtitles for the English audio along with subtitles that are accurate to the Japanese audio, which is fucking amazing. It's really interesting to go back and see how some of these scenes differ in localization. The story has a really good pace of escalation, like just in chapter 4 of the game you've already upped the conspiracy from Judgment. The only time it ever really fumbled it for me was sadly in chapter 9, where the entire events of that chapter felt mostly forced in order for a few events to happen so the rest of the plot can play out. If the Gomejul just told Nanba his brother was alive and well, then the rest of the game basically doesn't happen. They wouldn't have had to burn down their base and all of their homes, and the wall of muscle wouldn't have collapsed, and the Omi wouldn't have been able to invade Ijincho. But they had to not tell Nanba so he would turn to Bleach Japan, and Ichi and the rest of the gang would chase after him so they could have a fight in the Bleach Japan office so Ichiban could see a picture on the wall of the Prime Minister and realize who he really is. This is about on level of dumb as the rubber bullets for me, and it really took me out of the game's narrative for a bit. But of course, like all of the games, it brings it around with some amazing moments. Despite its at times fumbling with the insane and convoluted twists and conspiracies, Yakuza 7 manages to be the most heartfelt entry in the whole series. The torch has been passed. I wait excited to see where they take Ichi and the gang next. Oh, and please localize Ishin, thank you.
Hello everyone. I'm back.
You didn't have to cut me off. Like it never happened, that we were nothing. I don't even need your love, but you treat me like a stranger, and I feel so loved. No, you didn't have to stop so long. Had to find you like you're to change your number. I said I don't need that gold. Now you're just a body that I used to know. Now you're just a body that I used to know. Now you're just a body that I used to know.
Death Stranding is certainly not a game for everyone. Hell, I'd say this game is for almost no one, but it scratches all the right itches in my monkey brain that kept me addicted from start to finish. Similar to how I said Wonderful 101 was Kamiya Unchained, Death Stranding is Kojima Unchained, and honestly, I'm glad for that. I'd say it was a pretty big risk making a weird hiking delivery game like this on a budget that he was given, because it's a 50-50 chance that this shit flops because it doesn't appeal to almost anybody. Let's tackle some of the elephants in the room about this game first. Yes, the dialogue is dumb and full of puns, double, triple, and even quadruple meanings to the point that it alienates most people. I have nothing more to say about it other than it didn't bother me, and Kojima's weird directing kept me engaged with the story. The Princess Beach scene definitely made me audibly groan, but it's honestly not the worst shit I've heard Kojima make a character say in the past, but it's definitely up there. The combat by itself is nothing really to write home about. The guns do the shoot bangs like any other third-person shooter, and melee combat is kind of limp. Once the initial wonderment of boss fights wear off, they're really boring, with you just peppering them with bullets until they fall over and die. So after saying all this, you're probably wondering, why do I like this game? Well, first and foremost, the biggest strength and achievement Death Stranding has in my eyes is its ability to keep me completely immersed in its world and its rules. Just like any game, there is obviously things to do to break the game in a way that the designers clearly didn't intend for, but in the case of Death Stranding, I bought into its world so much that I always treated BTs like a massive threat, despite it being more worth to just aggro one of them and fight the mini-bosses for materials. I didn't kill a single person in my entire playthrough because they established right away what happens when someone dies and why things like suicide are a huge issue in their world. Something that no video, not even my own, can convey is how satisfying the gameplay feels. People mocked it for being QWOP, but as long as you keep the cargo organized, which you can auto do in the menu with a single tap of triangle, it's never really an issue. Like, unless you're actively trying to, you should never fall over. I don't know how else to describe it, but just traversing felt really fun. It had a high enough level of engagement mechanically that I never found myself just mindlessly off in my own world, not even paying attention to the game, but it never required enough focus that it felt in the way or distracting. You simply just have to play it for yourself and see what I mean. When doing things like going down hills and you have a bunch of cargo on your back and you're slightly twiddling around the sticks in order to keep proper balance. That might sound annoying, but it really isn't. The game has a great weight to it, so things like double jumps are really fun. The only complaint that I have is when you need to steady or grip your cargo. It requires you to hold one or both of the triggers, and the PS4 controller is not made for that. Sadly, Sony really loves their jagged edge L2 and R2. For some unknown reason, the trailers for the game never showed off all the cool tools the game has. I know they did their showcases a few times, but most people aren't going to watch that shit realistically. The game has so many fun little things to fuck around with, like the speed skeleton, which lets you soar through the air, or the floating cargo rack that you can drag behind you, which if empty, you can get on top of and then ride it like a hoverboard. Do that on a mountain, and now this has become a snowboarding game. Or the sticky gun, which allows you to shoot a projectile and slingshot cargo back to you. This can either be just cargo laying on the ground, or rip it straight off a mule while they're not paying attention or in the middle of combat, which you could then grab it out of midair and then swing it at them like a weapon. This makes for some really fun and creative combat encounters where the only solution isn't just using the bola gun, which is incredibly powerful, or gunning enemies down with the lethal or non-lethal weapons. If you really enjoyed fucking around in the sandbox of MGS5, then I think you would really like this. It might have slightly less tools compared to Phantom Pain, but I think they're far more unique and rewarding to use comparatively. The thing I realized about the gameplay is that it's kind of a survival game, but without the constant need for food and water, which I often find really fucking annoying. Two moments that really stuck out in my playthrough was when I got caught in a blizzard for the first time while going to the peak of the mountain. I don't know what it was about the zero visibility in the hyper-degradation of my cargo that made it really fun and tense. Then there was this one time in post-game where I had a delivery to get something back from a terrorist camp behind the mountain. The only thing was, I didn't realize it was a terrorist camp, so I went there ill-prepared and ended up having to fight them, and it was one of the coolest gameplay moments in the entire game. Since I didn't realize it was a terrorist camp, I walked up and actually aggroed the entire group. I knocked out the two guys closest to me right at the edge. One was carrying a gun and the other was carrying smoke grenades. Then I used my newly acquired smoke grenades to run to the tall grass without them seeing me, and then started using the shout button, which up until that point, which would have Sam shout out, and if you were connected online and within the chiral network, someone would respond back. When in combat encounters, it actually turns into a taunt, and I didn't realize this until just then, so it allowed me to slowly start picking off the rest of them as they would follow me deeper and deeper into the woods away from their camp. This was the coolest Rambo-styled guerrilla warfare I had ever experienced. It's a shame that the game never really pushes you to be ill-equipped like this. Death Stranding is the anti-walking sim, where your goal is to walk as little as possible and optimize your routes and equipment placements for ease in future trips. There was something that turned on in my feral monkey brain that really enjoyed setting up a network of zip lines in the mountains, or a bunch of ladders that would allow me to cross the rivers near the edge of the waterfall, which would surely kill me if I fell off it. I spent so much time in Chapter 3 once I got to the second area, just getting a coast-to-coast highway. The game gives you this really cool, if not weird, sense of satisfaction and accomplishment when you build something really useful like a bridge to cross a gap or river that is getting in your way, or you find a really good shortcut. I'd imagine this is the same feeling that someone gets when they optimize a speedrun. Despite the fact that you never see any other players and the only other non-hostile NPCs you run into are these other deliverers, which can even give you items if you walk up to them in some cases, the game has a really cool sense of community and world building. Like, at one point I didn't play the game for 2 weeks because I was busy, and then I came back and I had a bunch of likes on my structures along with some new additions from other people that really helped build out my world. There was one spot that I really needed to build a bridge for, but I didn't have the materials, so I was like, I'll get back to it later and maybe go scrounge around for some stuff at mule camps. But then when I booted the game up the next time, someone happened to build something just where I needed it. For me, it has the perfect level of detachment where I don't actually have to interact with other people, and you just get the feeling of satisfaction from helping other people when you get a shitload of likes when they use your structures. The big thing about Death Stranding was that it was my relax game. When not taking in the story, which we'll get into in just a bit, this was a game I would spend hours exploring the world, doing deliveries, and just thinking to myself. As cheesy or as cringe as it may be, while traversing this post-apocalyptic world, I spent a lot of time being introspective about myself, my channel, and where I currently am with my life and my future. Realistically, YouTube won't be my job forever, and I should start thinking what comes next in my life. I thought a lot about myself and what I dislike about my current life and my channel, where I want to take the channel next, and a whole lot of new things I want to learn. Now you may be thinking, what does any of this shit have to do with the game? Because of this game leaving me alone in this vast world by myself, it was the vehicle to my self-introspection, and I really appreciate it for that. Was that its intended goal? I don't know, I'm not Kojima, but seeing how other people have talked about the game in a similar way, or how a lot of people said this was their podcast game, I think maybe I'm on the right track in believing so. Now, a lot of the game's world and science is explained via emails and logs, and surprising given Kojima's last game, The Phantom Pain, this felt like the perfect opportunity to have audio logs, which there aren't. Maybe this was a conscious decision based on feedback from The Phantom Pain, or a way to prevent the budget from ballooning in size with how much they would have had to record. Or maybe it was a conscious decision so I would have moments like this to be lost in my thoughts. Maybe if all the emails and interview logs were audio as well, I wouldn't have had the time to be lost in my own thoughts. Either way, I'm glad this game invoked something like that in me, even if it was intentional or not. The art direction for this game is amazing. I've brought it up in other videos, but it has a great balance between photorealistic graphics and a stylized art style for all the machinery. With each passing year, there is more and more games I struggle to have visual clarity. Too much shit is the same or similar colors in the environment, or you're just being overloaded on stimuli, and I find it really annoying. Death Stranding always maintained visual clarity except in times where it was intentional for you not to be able to, like in the whiteout blizzards. I really enjoyed how all the machinery looked in this game. It has a really cool, angular, sleek aesthetic to it. I also really liked how varied parts of the map were, from the marshlands behind the mountains to the red clay sections by the junk dealer that made me feel like I was exploring Mars. It just further drew me into exploring its world more and more, and once I was finished, I was sad and wished I had more to do. I loved the story. The science of the world is super cool, and the problems this world has really instills this feeling of, oh god, shit is so fucked, I would never want to be here. It's a world that's so far gone that people who try to put it back together have lost sight of what they're doing and fully embrace the ends justify the means approach, doing things that if said new civilization were to find out what they were built upon, would probably question if it was even worth to do it in the first place. Like, yeah, you're rebuilding the world and getting everyone reconnected is nice and all, but you're also sacrificing babies and keeping vegetable women alive to keep the BB network. Of course the people around you aren't going to question that, hey, isn't this shit a little fucked up? Because they're the ones doing it, they're the ones giving the orders, and then when the only person who wasn't in on it finds out what they're actually doing, they fucking kill him. It's such a great and fascinating moral dilemma. At some point in the game, you do get a log that talks about how the BB project was suspended at one point, but then they had to bring it back. That's how dire things were getting. Of course, we the player eventually find out the real reason why the BB network and the chiral network is being made, and that Bridget has been lying to everybody to further push her plan, but to every other character who is going along with this, they're under the notion that, hey, we need to do some really inhumane shit or the human race will go extinct. And because of all this, at times the game makes you wonder, am I really working for the good guys? Is what we're doing really that good? You start to understand why people aren't too open to joining the UCA right away. They mean well and all, but they've proven to be pretty shifty and shady. While I do love the game we ended up getting, I can't help but wish we had a full game dedicated to the flashback sections of the game. It was so cool going through these hellscapes of World War I and II with phantoms and skeletons and all these weird machines straight out of hell crawling around. Mads Mikkelsen, Tommy Earl Jenkins, and Troy Baker stole the fucking show with award-winning performances. Higgs is such a fucker, I love it. What an asshole. Your fight with him is one of my favorite moments in all of Kojima's games.
So come on!
Yeah, realistically it is just doing the Ocelot fight in MGS4 again, but after this guy has been fucking with you all game, this felt like such a great fucking payoff. I was screaming and hollering the entire time, especially when I found out you can bob and weave, and I was like, this is just like God Hand! And then it tells you to pull both of the triggers to grip. I just started screaming, go for the fucking headbutt! And then the prompt showed up and I lost my shit. It was a fucking great moment. Then there's Amale's character, which is just so fascinating. A reality-altering being having an existential crisis about their own existence is one of my favorite writing ideas. She's the root of all the problems in this game. She caused them, some completely out of her control due to her own existence which she had no say in, and others because she sped up the process and manipulated everyone around her. She's a concept, an otherworldly being, something beyond our comprehension, yet also human, which is what led her to speeding up the process because she is beyond the concept of time. She's been waiting all alone this entire time, waiting to fulfill her tasks she never asked for. The nightmares that people with doom suffer at night are the visions of the future, potential paths humanity can take that she's sending down to them so they can make their own decision on what happens, which is what in the end drove people like Higgs insane. I think there's a really good amount of meat to this game's story and world, and in the coming years we will see some really amazing analysis videos spawned about it. I'm glad this game exists. It's weird, lopsided, and definitely not for everyone, but it was just right for me. I hope Koji Pro's next game is just as unique, and Kojima keeps making weird things that are incredibly ambitious, even if it results in them falling completely flat on their face. Now, Death Stranding was originally my game of the year since the PC version released in 2020, and I went into this video and wrote most of it expecting that, until it was usurped by a last-minute game I squeezed in.
And now, the Game of the Year award goes to
13 Sentinels. Now, I said at the start of this video that all of these sections contain full spoilers for their respective games. 13 Sentinels is best played going in completely blind, knowing nothing about it, so please, if you have any interest in playing this game, pause the video now and go play it. 13 Sentinels is an amalgamation of all of my favorite sci-fi stories, media, writing conventions, and tropes. This feels like something perfectly crafted for me. So what is 13 Sentinels? It's Vanilleware's, the maker of Dragon's Crown, and Muramasa's latest game. It's a side-scrolling visual novel, Balloon's tower defense RTS with Final Fantasy VIII battle system, all wrapped together in a sci-fi mystery thriller, held together with an analysis section of files and timelines. If this game didn't have the analysis section, it would be the most confusing shit ever. I don't know how the fuck Vanillaware did this, but it somehow managed to have a game with 13 main characters and have all of them be really interesting and likable. Anytime I would go, I'm not really feeling this character, I want to go back to the others, suddenly some really cool shit would happen and get me right back on board with their narrative. For a game with a non-linear story presentation, it's amazingly cohesive and book-ended. By the end of the game, everything is answered and I was left with no questions, with one of the most satisfying endings and epilogues I've seen in a long time. Again, like I mentioned a minute ago, this is all thanks to how detailed the mechanics of the world are documented in the analysis section. A few times I was really confused about how things worked, and then I went and read one of the new mystery files and that cleared things up perfectly. The game also makes going back and rechecking facts extremely painless, as you could replay and review every conversation in the timeline section. This has spoiled me rotten that I wish every game had something like this, or at least a theater mode so you could go back and rewatch cutscenes and you don't have to replay an entire level to get a 20-second clip of the Marauders intro at the end of the level, Doom Eternal. To talk about this game's story and why it's amazing, I have to spoil everything and work backwards from there, or else I would be inevitably recapping the entire thing from start to finish, and we'd be here forever. So in the 22nd century, nanomachines were invented, which led to the eventual downfall of humanity due to these technologies falling into the wrong hands, bringing about things like mind hacking and an eventual virus that wiped out all but 15 people. Throughout the game, we get to see bits and pieces of the remaining 15 humans bring about their own demise due to their egos, self-righteousness, and self-preservation, which results in the complete and utter extinction of the human race. Their selfish acts not only killed themselves, but also set their successors down a path of never-ending, cyclical suffering by tampering with the Ark Project, meaning that the dormant code copied from the game Mighty Kaiju Daimos would be activated in the simulation of humanity's successors. So what was supposed to be originally a peaceful simulation preparing the successors for the new world would be relentlessly attacked by these monsters, being killed and reborn over and over again until they figured out how to stop this cycle, completely oblivious to the fact that they've been doing this for thousands of years. My favorite character in the game is Renya Goto. For most of the early and mid-game, you won't be able to play as him since 80% of his story is locked behind needing you to get all 12 other characters to 80%. He makes background appearances in a handful of their stories, but you can't really get a good read on him. He's kind of standoffish and you don't really know what his goals and motives are. He's always carrying around this little notebook with him, and that is the key to his success. It may sound stupid, but he's the only character who's actually taking notes and actively cataloging the events he witnesses and the information he gains. Since he's aware of the existence of tampering with memories, this allows him to keep his facts straight and point out when things don't line up. This leads to my favorite moment in the entire game at the very end. Goto is face to face with their creator. He methodically and meticulously breaks down every single inconsistency in her story, leading her to revealing her true identity in her own frustration.
You do have a genius mind, but also the form of a child. I imagine it's harder than usual to hide your agitation.
It's absolutely not. Now you're just trying to trick me?
Now that he's exposed her to not being the teacher Miss Morimura in the body of a child clone of herself, she is actually the original Professor Chihiro Morimura from the year 2188. This is the woman who is a part of the final 15 humans who created the ARK project to bring about a race of successors. The same group of people who fucked the world beyond repair and brought an end to humanity. She single-handedly destroyed the world, then hid the fact and tried to implant her memories in the body of her successor in the new race so she could live amongst them and get a do-over. And you know what Goto does? He tells her to fuck off in the most satisfying conversation in the entire game. This is what the game has been building up to for 20 hours, and it is so fucking worth it. Now, she isn't as evil as you would think a person who killed humanity is. She's actually more complex than that, and is remorseful and wants to right her wrongs, which is such a strong point about the writing of this game. Pretty much every antagonist in this game has an understandable motive. Not a justifiable motive, but one where you can see where they're coming from, even if at the end of the day you still see them as a piece of shit. Of course, there are a few rather simple villains, but I think that's fine because not every bad person does things for a complex or morally gray reason. They are just evil for the sake of it. You know, for a game with a 30-hour runtime of pure storytelling, it has immaculate pacing. I never felt bored or found that any given scene was dragging. It also has a great sense of escalation. It manages to keep one-upping itself with twists, which normally is a recipe for disaster. You go from the reveal of giant robots, to time traveling, to nanomachines and hyper-advanced AI, to you being the aliens, to there actually being no time traveling, to then reveal that it was all a simulation. No wonder Yoko Taro was really hyping up Vanillaware. In a lot of ways, they made their own Nier, which is also probably one of the big reasons why I love this. And the thing I appreciate the most about 13 Sentinels is how conclusive its ending is. You complete the final battle, you see the message left to you by the people of 2188, and the gang begins their new journey as the next humans. Then you get a flash forward 5 years to see where everyone is with their lives. Everyone gets a happy ending, even people who probably don't deserve it, like Ida. I think it goes without saying if you've been watching this section up until this point, but the game is fucking gorgeous. Even through YouTube's terrible compression, which often ruins how good games look, it still comes out as one of the most striking games visually I have ever played. I don't even know how to describe it other than it looks like a moving painting. Some animations look a little weird, and it slightly drove my OCD up a wall for a bit when I noticed that the characters are mirrored no matter which side they're facing, even when it wouldn't make sense, but it's so pretty that this issue quickly melted away. Part of me wishes that the destruction section was more visually detailed, actually showing off what the moves were envisioned as instead of just constrained to a little demo movie when you hover over the attack in the menu. For a while I wish it looked like Front Mission 3, but the simplistic visuals did grow on me after a while. Part of me is torn on the combat of this game. It feels like it clearly wasn't the main focus and not nearly as much time was put into it compared to Remembrance, and because of that, it's rather simplistic and nothing really to write home about. Don't get me wrong, it's fun and never felt like it's in the way, but I always had this gnawing in the back of my mind that this isn't really as good as the other parts of this game. The game has really good sound design, which helps bridge the gap in your brain between its simplified visuals and what is actually supposed to be happening. I loved the revving sound when you use the blade attack from the Gen 1 mechs that would tear through any major problem units.
They ought to be used to fights by now. Let's do this! Got him! Class is in session! Yeah! See ya!
Let's turn this around.
This is definitely the first time I've ever felt this, but it was actually kind of satisfying to see the game's frame rate tank when you pull off some massive attacks that destroyed huge parts of the Deimos army.
Slow. Hit. Signal offline. Here we go. I'll try.
It's like when you played balloons on the iPod Touch as a kid and you get to the really late stages in the game, and that shit is running at 10 FPS. It's pure Kino in the final wave when you're fighting for your lives and the map is swarmed with absurd amounts of units. Huge parts of the minimap just became solid blocks of red. It really drove home the impossible odds they were faced with. Since the game pauses between actions, the frame rate tanking never actually impacts your performance, so that's the only reason I think that I'm not bitching about that this sucks and instead think it's actually kinda cool. For a while, this game was just kind of missing in action after its reveal. Maybe I just wasn't keeping up with it the whole time, but it felt like years before we got any news about it, and then for a while I was really worried that it wasn't going to come out in the West. I am so happy that it ended up being localized. It's a shame that it didn't seem to get much fanfare by Atlus, and it seems to be the sleeper hit of 2020. Absolutely check out this game. It's my favorite release of 2020. I am so happy that I made the time to play it. Every year I always have periods where I wonder, am I outgrowing video games? And then something like this comes along and reminds me that there is still amazing stuff out there being released. This is the most seamless 30-hour playthrough I have ever had. The game said what it wanted, it ended, and it got the fuck out. No drawn-out pointless crap, no meandering middle sections, just a well-presented and satisfying experience. I have no idea where Vanillaware goes from here. This feels like they have peaked as a studio. But here's to hoping that amazing stuff like this never stops coming out, and that we will always be graced with amazing games that inspire us, make our days, and leave us something to look forward to. So before I do the generic outro and I talk to nobody and go into some of my thought process and feelings about making this video, I thought I'd end it off with talking about what games I'm looking forward to in 2021. Who knows what's actually going to come out in 2021? I expect in the coming months to see a lot of delays due to the pandemic, but I did want to mention the 7 games that I'm really looking forward to this year. I'm not sure if I'm going to cover all of these on the channel, but I think I might to some extent. Whether it be a backlog monologue where I just talk about it briefly with my short impressions, or maybe I'll do a thoughts on video, which is also kind of an impressions video but just dedicated to that game, or maybe I'll make a full-blown review. The first game is Hitman 3. It's already out at this point. I just haven't played it yet because I've been working on this and other stuff. I want to try to do a review on it next before I go into the Yakuza 2 retrospective. I'm interested to see how they're going to end off the new trilogy. I hope it ends well, but part of me is a little worried since a lot of the wording that they had for the trailers leading up to it was similar to stuff they said about Hitman Absolution, and we all know how that turned out. The next one is No More Heroes 3. Part of me thinks that this probably won't come out in 2021, but if it does, it'll be on the tail end of the year. What we have seen so far is really fucking cool, and I need to get through all of the Kill the Past stuff and cover that on the channel before No More Heroes 3, which my original idea for the start of this year was going to be Kill the Past video, covering Silver Case, 25th Ward, Killer 7, and Flower, Sun, and Rain, and then do a follow-up video talking about No More Heroes 1, 2, and Travis Strikes Again. And this would be leading up to the release of No More Heroes 3, which then I would do a review on it. But I think we still don't have a release date, so who knows when that's going to be. The next game is the Neo 2 PC port. This is another game that's already out, and I've actually played a little bit at this point. I've only played the first level, and so far I've really enjoyed it. There's just slight tweaks to the gameplay and menus that is making me really like it over Neo 1. And I didn't really hate Neo 1. I did recommend it on the channel like 2-3 years ago at this point, but there is just some mechanics and some boss fights that I really hate about that game. But so far, the new weapons seem really fucking cool, and I'm excited to sink my teeth into this game. Next up is Bravely Default 2. I believe this is also coming out soon in February. The first Bravely Default is probably my favorite 3DS game. It's a tie between Bravely Second and Fire Emblem Awakening. I really loved the cast of the original game, so I hope that this one has a cast that is just as strong. I didn't get really that much of a feel for them in the first demo. I think they put out a second one with more stuff, but I just haven't checked it out. I was a little iffy on the combat changes, where it's now enemies in the hub world instead of a random battle system with a slider that you could dictate the encounter rates. Like everything else, I just hope it's good. Next is Resident Evil 8, or RE Village, or whatever the fuck it's supposed to be. So far what they've shown is really cool, and it seems like there's going to be already more enemy variety than Resident Evil 7, which is probably my biggest complaint about the game because I hate the fucking molded. They were so fucking bland and kind of make RE7 blurred together because of it. I don't particularly hate RE7, but over time my opinion of it has kind of gone down. I don't really like it as much as I did compared to when it first released. It's still good, but it's not one of my favorites, and I hope the devs took a bunch of constructive feedback about 7 only to make 8 even better and crazier. Next up is SMT5. It's the Atlas meme, just like Tokyo Mirage Session, where they announced it way too fucking early before they even started development and everyone wondered where it is. All I have to say about it is I hope it's good and doesn't disappoint me. The final game on this list is the Nier Remake. Nier Gestalt is my favorite game ever. It's what I think is Taro's magnum opus and one of the greatest games ever written. All I want is for them not to fuck it up, but even if they do, I still have my original copy. Some things that are kind of worrying is the fact that they're redoing the audio. Just because you get back the cast, and even then I don't even know if they're getting back all the English voices, doesn't mean you're going to get the same performance. Obviously that's not a knock to the voice actors. I think that Kaine is Laura Bailey's greatest performance she's ever given, but sometimes there's just a magic you capture the first time that you're not able to recreate. I know it's not out yet, so I can't really say one way or the other, but I think I really would have just preferred having the original game re-released at 60 FPS on PC and new consoles. Please, Square Enix, don't fuck this up. If you made it to the end of this video, I just want to say thanks for watching as always. If you really like the channel, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. All patrons get access to videos a day early, and I'm now going to shout out my $5 and up patrons who really help support the channel. Bully, Lucy the Fox, Comrade Fox, Tristan the White Wolf, Slemf Tingle, Ek Frazo, Matthew Elliott, Dusty the Zombie, Filthy Finger 69, Clivermort, William Moore, Tyler Schertzer, Some Panda, Poke Joke S, Joshua DiLarino, Chichometrius, Ben Johnson, Sarah Chan, Oods of Nudes, Fish Kami, Joan Eisen, Alejandro Benitez, Star Fox, Flarbu, and Mitchell. Thanks so much, guys. If you're a card game player of any kind, I have a TCG Player affiliate link in the description below. All purchases you make will give me a small kickback, so it's another way to support the channel. Sadly, this video took a lot longer than I ever wanted it to, but I really underestimated how much work it was going to be to write all these full-fledged reviews that could have been their own videos. I want to thank Foxcade with the Wonderful 101 section. He gave me a lot of tips and pointers and reviewed all the mechanic mentioning I talked about in the video to make sure I wasn't incorrect about anything. And I want to thank my friend Vape, who helped with the Death Stranding section, which I initially felt was kind of missing something, and then we had some more discussion about the game. It really helped me bring my opinions on the game and why I think it's really good to a more realized and articulated way. I don't know how else to describe it. As for what's coming out next, I want to do a Hitman 3 review just so I could bookend that series and the retrospective and everything I've covered about it on the channel. Then after that, I finally want to fully work on the Yakuza 2 retrospective. I've talked a little bit about it on Twitter in the past, and I believe in the previous backlog monologue, but at times I really struggle with wanting to continue to do the same projects over and over again, especially when they take a lot of time, which is why a lot of my plans end up getting changed compared to what I say at the end of videos and then what ends up coming out next. Like I just mentioned a few minutes earlier, I originally planned to have a Kill the Past video at the start of this year, but that didn't end up happening. Sometimes I consider just doing nothing but the Yakuza retrospective back to back, but that's a lot of work and I'd probably get incredibly burnt out and people would lose interest. And there's just a lot of things I want to do, and I'm definitely very scattered with my interests and what I want to cover, as sometimes I'll just play something by chance and then impulsively really want to make a video about it because I feel really passionate about the game. Either way, as of right now, the time of recording, my next video is going to be a Hitman review, then it's going to be the Yakuza 2 retrospective. There might be some smaller videos in between those two because the Yakuza 2 retrospective is going to be a lot of work, as I need to play both Yakuza 2 and Kiwami 2. God, just thinking about it, it's going to be even more work as I move up through the series because the games get more expansive and more detailed and longer, like Yakuza 4 and 5. I don't even want to think about how I'm going to be formatting those videos because they're going to end up being like 7 hours long. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video and whatever I come to make next. As always, thanks for watching and see you next time.